All right, so today we're going to be talking about the reasons why I love working with coding bootcamp students, both as a mentor and as an employer. I think coding bootcamps and coding bootcamp students can have a bit of a bad reputation, and that's for a few different reasons. Number one, the industry is pretty unregulated still, even though they've been around for, at this point, 7 or 8 years. And we've all seen those horror stories about people that paid a lot of money and maybe didn't get very much in return. We've seen the coding bootcamps that failed. I myself went to one that failed. And so I can understand why people have maybe a little bit of skepticism about hiring somebody that went to a coding bootcamp. In fact, some companies even have a policy of not hiring bootcamp students. So I know Airbnb, for example, used to write on their job descriptions, "No bootcampers, please." And so I think that's kind of extreme and maybe a little bit discriminatory. And even more than that, I think Airbnb and companies like them are throwing the baby out with the bathwater. I think there are a ton of really wonderful coding bootcamp graduates, and specifically, I wanted to talk today about the reasons I love working with them. And I'll admit, as a former coding bootcamp student myself, I am a bit biased, but I think if you consider it, there are a lot of compelling reasons for hiring and working with coding bootcamp students in general. So let's get into those now. All right, so the first reason why I love working with coding bootcamp students is their grit. So it may not be impressive for people that have coded since they were 12 to get through a bootcamp, but as someone who did myself, I can tell you that there's almost nothing in my life that I've done that was harder than doing a coding bootcamp. I think if you've been in the industry for a while, it can be a bit hard to appreciate, or maybe you just forgot how hard it is to acquire those skills initially and how difficult it can be to teach yourself to think like a computer. The truth is, nobody comes out of the womb knowing how to program. I just made a video about this. There is no gift. It is just hard work, and for a lot of people, a lot of frustration. And I think that is actually something worth considering when trying to decide whether or not to hire somebody or to work with somebody. And that grit is really helpful when it comes to acquiring the most important skill for learning how to code, which isn't coding itself, but it's learning how to learn. I know for myself, in most cases, I'm a lot more concerned about whether or not somebody is adaptable and can teach themselves things rather than whether or not they're specialized in a particular technology. And that is especially true when it comes to hiring junior or entry-level developers. And when you compare a bootcamp student with a CS major on this front, I think I gotta give it to the bootcamp student. I know that person has been through something extremely difficult, and while they may not know data structures and algorithms, I know that they know how to code and to build software and can most likely make an impact on day one. So that's grit, and that's why a coding bootcamp student can make an impact on your team. But let's talk about my second reason for wanting to work with bootcamp students, which actually has a lot more to do with you, and that is the beginner's mind. So C.S. Lewis talks in some of his writings about this thing called the curse of knowledge. And this idea is basically that when you get really good at something, you forget about how hard it was when you were first starting out, and you forget about all these little nuanced things that you figured out for yourself that have long since been lost to memory. And the great thing about hiring and working with coding bootcamp students is they force you out of your curse of knowledge, and they force you to adopt a beginner's mindset. The reason is you can't rely on a lot of the shared language and context that you might have with a more senior developer. You have to answer their questions on their terms, and in order to do so well, you have to put yourself in their mind and remember what it was like when you didn't know anything. Now, I think for a lot of people that sounds frustrating, but I think it's actually good, and the reason it's good is that it will force you to become a better mentor. Now, not everyone may be interested in mentorship, but I think mentorship is pretty key, especially when it comes to building a team and trying to cultivate resources and get people to grow their skill set. And if you're interested in leadership in any capacity, even if it's down the road, I think mentorship is going to be a key part of that. And so the best way to start building those mentoring skills is to hire a bootcamp student. Make yourself available to them, answer their questions, and do your best to put yourself in their mind. You'll be better for it. My third reason why you might want to hire or work with a bootcamp student is purely practical, and that is potential and upside. So if you think about hiring a senior engineer in the market, the thing about them is that they're going to be more expensive because their potential has been more realized. But if you can get a coding bootcamp student that's hungry and wants to learn, then the good thing about that is that they're probably going to rise very quickly. They're going to gain skills at a pretty rapid rate, and you might get someone that you hired at a junior rate to be performing more like a mid-level or maybe even a senior if the person is pretty exceptional. This may sound totally utilitarian, but I think the reality is that coding bootcamp graduates need jobs, and a lot of times they don't have a whole lot of experience to show for it. And I know for a lot of employers, especially these days, they can't afford to hire senior engineers. And so I think a potential solution here is to hire a junior and train them into a senior through that mentoring that I just mentioned. The bootcamp student gets experience, they get skills, and you get to actually hire someone that you can afford. And if you pick the right person, I think they will be way outperforming what most people would expect. I'm thinking of this one colleague I had who went to a coding bootcamp, and this guy was just so curious and smart that he crushed it. 2 years in, he was performing at a senior level, and I don't think that's totally unheard of. So I think if you have the right hiring process and you're really attuned to asking the right questions, then I think you have a good shot at getting someone that can provide outsized value for your organization. So that's it. Those are my 3 reasons for hiring a bootcamp student, for enjoying working with bootcamp students. And so I hope you take that into consideration the next time you're thinking about making a mid-level or junior hire. Thanks so much for watching to the end. If you're still here, you'd probably like the rest of my channel, which focuses on software engineering and self-employment. So consider subscribing. Remember, stay hungry, stay curious, and I'll see you in the next one.